I thought I'd pick up on Amy's well-put theme about appreciating different kinds of parenting. I think that's a value that a lot of us ascribe to, but I have found that once you start writing about your own kids, it's much harder to actually be in that position all the time, because simply by putting your own ideas out there, you're implying that you have something to teach everyone else. And you don't have to say that at all. It just sort of is implicit. I definitely have found this to be true in the reactions to a family column I have written for Slate for a while. And in the beginning, when I started working on this column, I had the temerity to read the comments that would come in at the bottom. This is a very bad idea. I know this. I've been an internet journalist long enough to know. But, you know, in the beginning, I was curious, and this felt like a more personal kind of writing. And I was a little nervous about doing it because it wasn't kind of this more serious legal analysis I had been trying to do and get a reputation for. And for one of my first stories, one of the comments said, "I don't believe in your children at all. They must be imaginary." And that was the last time I think I deliberately read an online comment about anything I wrote about family. I think there is a way in which once you start having your children and your husband and yourself as characters in a piece of writing, you're just inviting a different kind of reaction than other work. And I certainly think you've obviously experienced this in a kind of exponential way. But I think it's true generally. And so for me, there are kind of a couple of lessons from this. One is that, you know, you run with it and you continue to put yourself out there and argue for your ideas, but you also try and be somewhat self-deprecating and humble about it so that people can see that you're also struggling along the way. I wrote a piece a number of years ago about breast pumps. I just was sort of interested in the history of them, like where did that idea come from? It turned out, not surprisingly, that the original models were milking machines for cows. In about 1900, they started, you know, in Montana and then kind of gradually migrated into the Medela or whatever other brand pumps we're so used to today. But when I had my first son, I was actually a law student at Yale. I figured out, and it was a weird moment where there were 5 of us in my class who all had babies that year. And, you know, people were sort of awed by this. In fact, it was like a totally strategic thing to do because we were third-year students. We had done most of our work. We all knew what was happening next pretty much in our careers. And in fact, we had a lot of freedom in this academic setting, and our babies became kind of the mascots of the class. And people would even volunteer to watch them so that I could go to Fed courts or wherever I was going. But in any case, I was doing a lot of pumping of breast milk because my mother had said to me that, and I have 3 sisters and my mom's a doctor, so this was a big commitment. She said she had never let a drop of regular milk, you know, cross any of our mouths until we were a year old. And I thought, like, God, I mean, she was a resident. She was in the hospital in the ER. You know, the least I could do was pump twice a day so that my son Eli would have this breast milk he dearly needed until he was a year old. And my mother was an early breastfeeder because in the early 70s this was much less expected than it is now. So I started a clerkship for a federal judge. I was still pumping twice a day. I had a little post-it that I would put on my door to make sure no one would walk in. By this time Eli was 9 months old. Finally, I said to my mother, like, how did you do this? And it turned out that, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. She had never let any formula, never given us formula. It turned out the reason was that people started giving regular milk when babies were like 2.5 months old. So in fact, this whole sort of goal that I had set for myself had really nothing to do with the way I'd been raised, and I had created this expectation that was really outsized. I mean, it hadn't done any harm, but it was a realization for me about how you can really go down a path with a lot of commitment without quite knowing where you were going. And so I tried to tell those, I try in my family writing to tell those kinds of stories that are really about some discovery I made in which something I thought was so important turned out to be a little bit, I don't know, silly is strong, but maybe not as necessary as I thought. And I think sometimes people can respond to those stories and see that what one is trying to do as a writer is put out one's own experience as a template that other people can take or leave. Maybe you're actually saying it's not the right template at all. But I still think it's really hard to do. And I also think that when one is writing about family, if you don't want that to be your whole identity as a writer, you have to be careful to also be writing about other topics. When I first started this column, I got advice from a columnist at the Washington Post who I have a lot of respect for, and I was sort of wondering what she would think about how I was doing this, about doing this at all. But I also knew she was someone who occasionally referred to her daughters and her work. And she said, it's totally fine that you're doing it. You just have to make sure that for every mommy column you write 3 non-mommy columns. And that's a little bit of a straitjacket, in fact. I don't think that's the only way to be taken seriously. But I do think that if you don't want to be pigeonholed, it is important to kind of go back and forth. And also, one of the good things about journalism is there's plenty of opportunities to be a generalist, and you can kind of take advantage of that. The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit are the mommy wars and how real they are. When you're writing and you're the focus of a lot of vitriol on the web, or you are part of a debate on the web that you feel really strongly about, or you're talking with your friends and people disagree, they seem, the mommy wars, like they are everything, and that people are having these incredibly divisive reactions to the ways in which we parent or the choices we make. But I actually think that is misleading, that a lot of the times people are much closer together than they're really willing to acknowledge, and that most women who work, even if they're quite ambitious in their careers, they also want to be good parents. They don't consider themselves half-time mothers because they're working and they're spending fewer hours with their kids. And the stay-at-home moms that I know are often planning at a different stage in their life to do some work of some kind. I think the extreme poles come to stand for the reality in a way that doesn't actually match up with where most of us are on the spectrum. And I've certainly tried in my own writing to make that clear. But again, I think it's really hard. I think there's a way in which these conversations touch nerves where we forget about the common ground that's actually there and present. And it can even be there and present in our own friendships and lives, and we can still somehow forget about it when we're having these more public debates. Another thing I wanted to bring up, because I think it's so important, is the role of husbands in all of this. Unlike Amy, I got married when I was 25, so I did not choose my husband for his parenting skills. I don't think I really understood how important that was at all. And when I had my first son, Paul, my husband, was finishing his dissertation. He was a graduate student. He was really busy. He was there, but he wasn't fully involved for the first few months. And Eli was born in January, and I graduated in May, and then I was supposed to study for the bar for the summer before my clerkship. Who knows why I took that bar? I've never practiced law, but at the time it seemed really important. And we had a babysitter in the morning when I was listening to those awful bar prep tapes, but I wanted a little more time in the afternoon to study, and I thought that Paul and I should evenly split the days, that was the role he should be playing that summer. And he said no. He had a lot of work he wanted to do, and he did not see why the babysitter couldn't stay until 3:30. And we had a big clash about this. And looking back on it, I realized that the reason I was so passionate was that I didn't know how he was going to turn out to be a father down the line. It felt to me like this beginning was the whole reality, and that he wasn't pulling his weight. And I was I took umbrage in a kind of feminist way about this. But I was smart enough to back down, and I'm really glad I did, because, we're talking about 2 months and 3 hours a day in our son's life. And once Eli really became a little bigger and especially could eat real food and be entertained easily without me, Paul became someone who really is like a total full partner in child rearing. And then when we had another child, the same thing happened. And I have just found that makes my life possible in a way that it wouldn't be otherwise. I certainly we could have more babysitting and help, and we could have had it along the way if my husband worked constantly, but it would be really different from the family we have. he is an academic, and so a lot of the flexibility that Amy was talking about is something we've really benefited from. And the truth is that Paul is the one who has decided that people in our house, the adults in our house, come home at 5:30 if they possibly can, and we make dinner together and we're all together until the kids go to bed. I am much more likely to be the person, because of deadlines I have for Slate or just my nature, who's, pushing it until 6 o'clock. He really doesn't do that, and it's just a different kind of reality. And I'm not trying to give the impression that this is the only way to be in the world. That was really contrary to what I was trying to argue earlier and point out. But I do think that it's important to think all these things through and figure out a balance that makes sense for both partners. And I also think that our economy is structured in such a way that it often pushes against this kind of spousal arrangement, because there's one person who's making a lot of money by working really intense hours, and then one person for whom it just makes financial sense to be working much less or not working at all. And that's a problem, not simply for the legal profession, but it's certainly one that the legal profession could do a lot more thinking about. And one that when I'm giving advice to younger women, I often say to them, when you're thinking about getting married, you might want to really sit down and try to figure out what kind of parent your husband might be. Although I also think it's really hard to tell in advance. So it's not like there's some tests that you can take or give exactly. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is this question of what we give up. Because I think for all of us, probably everyone in the room, but certainly for us up here, that in order to make our families possible and our career possible, there's something that has to give. You can't be perfect at everything. And the way I think about it is that I have kind of given up any aspiration at any sort of perfection at middle-class life. And so I think of that as like, there are my kids and there's my work, and I try to do those things really well, or at least as well as I can, and then everything else, it's fine if it falls apart. And so, my house is not always clean. I am never the person with the perfect birthday present for someone else's child, because I buy them like 15 at a time in 10 minutes. I, usually need a haircut. There's like a long, including right now, there's a long list of things that I've sort of let slide, and I sometimes feel just as insecure and kind of, Martha Stewart idolizing about that as anyone else. But it does seem to me that we sometimes create a lot of work for ourselves by having expectations about every single facet of our lives. And maybe one thing to do is to kind of choose the things we really want to put our energy into and let ourselves off the hook for the rest of it. Thank you.
So this is why you shouldn't go last, because everyone said what I was going to say. I even have a breast milk story.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. We should have coordinated.
But I feel like, you can handle 2 breast milk stories, right? So I'm the mother of a 17-month-old, hence the breast milk stories. And so I'm new to the parenting gig. And I'm definitely the newbie on the panel. But I'm writing a book set in 1956. And my main character is a mother of 2. So I've spent the last year basically researching and living in the 1950s in my head. And it's been a lot of fun, sort of those vicarious Mad Men thrills, I get to write about pregnant women smoking and housewives gone wild and, drinking in the afternoon, spanking your kids, all these hideous things we're not allowed to do. But I came across Dr. Spock from 1956, Baby and Childcare. I left it over there. It's a big book. It's about 400 pages. The interesting thing about it, it's one book, and it's supposed to take mothers from birth all the way through puberty. Now, I don't know about you, but I know I have a 500-page book at home about the kind of kale I was supposed to eat while I was pregnant. I have about 4 different books on sleep training, a 1,000-page book on the first year, a 2,000-page book on the toddler years. And if you think about it, in 1950s, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have Google. Can you imagine parenting without Google? I went and looked at my Google history yesterday. In the last 24 hours alone, this is what I've Googled. This is a true story. Toddler swollen adenoids, toddler cute shoes for cheap, toddler wobbly walking, toddler humping stroller. And so I kind of envy that mom, that new mom in 1956 who didn't have all these voices, who didn't have all these books. They just had to trust their natural instinct. I'm not saying we should wax nostalgic for 1956. Clearly we shouldn't. Clearly I'd much rather be a mom in 2011 than in the 1950s. But I do think there's a lot to be learned from looking back, and to see that despite our information saturation, despite the huge leaps and bounds for women in the last 50 years, some things haven't changed all that much. Here's what Dr. Spock says to his 1956 mom, and I kind of feel like I should have this tattooed on my arm, Angelina Jolie style, because it's so interesting to me. Better to make a few mistakes from being natural than to do everything letter perfect out of a feeling of worry. And here's what got me, letter perfect out of a feeling of worry. That's me. That's my life. So this is what I'd like to talk about tonight. I think our conception of motherhood has really shifted sharply backwards, because 1956 was eerily familiar to me. And I think we've gone full circle. I think we went from this cult of domesticity, that idea of women being completely and totally letter perfect in the domestic realm, to this new cult of motherhood, where women need to have it all and do it all. But not only have it all and do it all, but we have to have it all and do it all perfectly. And the standards for mother are set so high now that in order to be considered a good mother, you have to be completely and utterly selfless. So we do a lot of talking about the self-esteem of kids, right? Well, I think we should talk about the self-esteem of mothers. Because I think it's really hard in 2011 to feel like a competent and successful mother and woman. I really do. And the reason why I think that is because what's the cruelest thing you can tell a mother? You call her selfish. A friend of mine pointed out recently that I have this terrible habit since my daughter's been born of saying I'm a bad mom. And then I confess to some fake maternal crime. And she's right, I do it all the time. And so I'll say something like, I am such a bad mom, I forgot to buy the organic milk. Or I am such a bad mom, I didn't buy milk at all and my daughter had to have a semi-skim. I'm such a bad mom, I gave my daughter a difficult name and she's gonna hate me when she's 13. Things like this. And when I say it, I really feel like I'm confessing. That's what it feels like. But the truth is, what I'm saying is I'm human and I'm imperfect, right? And I think if I say it to you, I feel like I'm beating you to the punch. You can't judge me if I already tell you I'm a bad mom. But to be fair, I don't think it's just me who's holding myself up to these ridiculous standards. I don't think this is something I should go talk to a therapist about. I actually think this is a social problem, that we all think we need to be perfect moms. I think Emily sort of hit on this a bit. The other day, this is about a couple months ago, I called my daughter's doctor. And I was really proud of myself, actually, because a few months in advance, I had put the note in the online calendar to remember to call about her vaccinations and her checkup. That's what a good mom does, right? You put it in your online calendar. So, yeah, good, yay for me. And I called the receptionist, and I say, listen, my daughter needs to have some shots and a checkup, and I'd really appreciate it if we could do it on the same day so I don't have to miss an extra day of work. And the receptionist says to me, no, sorry, we don't do that. And I say, listen, it would really make a huge difference to me. Let's be clear, is there a medical reason why we can't do it on the same day? She says, no, that's just the way we do things. So of course my lawyer instincts kick in now and I smell a negotiation and I'm ready for a fight. And so I say, can we do it first thing in the morning and last thing in the day? I will sit for hours, I don't care, I just don't want to miss an extra day of work. And I feel like I have the right on my side. And she goes, excuse me, ma'am, we're talking about your daughter's health here. We had the appointment on 2 separate days. And here's what she's saying, of course. She's saying, Julie, you are a terrible mother. You're trying to put your work first. You're trying to put yourself before your daughter. I'm not a bad mom. You guys don't know me, I just realized that. And I'm really not a bad mom, I swear. And I would argue that everyone in this room, I would bet, are great moms. We all love our children. We all care desperately about them. We're not Botox mom, who I think actually turned out to be a hoax, but who purportedly, injected Botox in our 8-year-old for a beauty pageant. We're not even Britney Spears, who goes country and doesn't bring her car seat, right? But the truth of the matter is, I think a lot of us equate motherhood with guilt. And we come home at the end of the day and we stew in this toxic guilt about how we didn't live up to this, selfless ideal. And here's the interesting thing. I think we sort of vacillate wildly. On one hand, we're bad mom, right? On the other hand, there's also this whole breed of us, and I think we go back and forth. I think it's the same group of people who's sanctimonious mom. And so I think when it comes to our children, we beat ourselves up mercilessly, right? But then if there's another mother who dares to do something even slightly different, we are so judgmental. I think that's why I think Amy's so brave to write a mommy memoir, because you know what mommy memoirs get? They get hate mail and death threats. I couldn't do it because I'm afraid of the judgment. Let's think about this. How many times have you heard another mother say to you, I couldn't do that? Like, you put your child in daycare. I couldn't do that. Or you work full time. I couldn't do that. You stay home all day long. I couldn't do that, right? And what they're really saying is, I judge your choices, right? And I think we should call that what it is. It's woman on woman hate crime. It's mom on mom hate crime. And I think we need to call an end to it. I really do. And I think ambitious women, I think women who've tasted success in the workplace in particular, have a tendency to bring this perfectionism and ambition home. And here's my breast milk story. When my daughter was born, we had a really tough time nursing. But of course, I had read all the books, and breast is best, and I had listened to the breastfeeding Nazis. And I actually fully believe that breast is best, but, it goes a little far, and here's why it goes too far. My daughter was being poisoned by my breast milk. She had breast milk jaundice. So my breast milk actually made her glow in the dark. I am not joking. She literally turned fluorescent yellow. So I had to stop breastfeeding for a little while the jaundice worked its way out of its system. And the doctors actually made me breastfeed for maybe 3 months until they finally were like, you know what? Your daughter's really yellow. So we got to stop this. So for 2 or 3 weeks, she just had to have formula. And during those 2 or 3 weeks, I had a pump to keep my supply up, because as soon as the jaundice worked her way through the system, I was going to start nursing again. Now, I don't know, I bet Emily knows this. Was the breast pump invented by a man? I thought so. It was a really tough time. Anyhow, long story short, at about 5 or 6 months, we're back to nursing. It's all going great. And I wake up one morning and I say, where's my plaque? Where is someone going to tell me I am a great mom? Because I won this. But no one's going to give me a report card. I'm not getting a plaque. I'm not getting a trophy. I'm not even getting a deal toy from it, right? And I was royally pissed off. And it made me realize that this perfectionism that I was bringing home, I wanted something in return. And that's really dangerous. And I started to let go of this a little bit. But I wanted to talk about some of the things that are expected of mothers today, because I think the list is pretty long and pretty intimidating. We're supposed to work and make enough money to afford good childcare. There's that famous second shift, of course. I think moms take care of a lot of the business of children. So we take care of the school, the homework, the doctor's appointments, etc. We have to deal with the wrath of the receptionist. Apparently, and I screwed this one up, we're supposed to have applied to preschool prenatally. What's up with that, right? We're supposed to not be tired when we get home from work. We're supposed to look good despite never sleeping. Actually, I don't even think we're supposed to look good anywhere. I think we're supposed to look hot. I think we're supposed to be yummy mummies, which is utterly ridiculous and probably the worst term ever coined in the history of the world. Which of course means hair highlighting and eyebrow waxing and going to the gym, all of which falls under that terrible category of me time, right? Like we really enjoy getting hair ripped out of our faces. And that me time is not supposed to be inconvenient to our husbands or our children or our bosses. So we're supposed to be perfect wives, perfect mothers, perfect employees, and not complain about the fact that men make more money than us doing the same jobs. I think thanks to Michelle Obama, we're even supposed to have biceps. So I think, and I think you guys are going to be with me on this one. If there's one thing we can agree on in this panel before we go home tonight, I think we need to expand the definition of having it all to include under-eye circles and cellulite. Yes? Yeah, okay. In contrast, what are the expectations of our fathers? Well, they need to show up occasionally. I think in 2011, this is true, and I wonder if any of us are guilty of it. I have friends who are full-time working mothers, and when their husbands take care of their kids on a Saturday night and they go out, they call it babysitting. Have you ever heard of a mother calling it babysitting? We have a joke in my house about the airplane rule. You know how when you're on an airplane, you're supposed to put your oxygen mask on you first and then on your child? Well, I think men live by this rule all the time. I don't know if that's such a bad thing, actually, but I think women never do. And I think that's really sad and dangerous. And I think often we'll frame our own choices in such a way that even when we're doing something for ourselves, we'll claim it's for our child. For example, I'll often hear a working mom, if you ask, why do you work, besides money, they'll often say, I work because I want to be a good role model for my daughter. Well, if you ask me, that's number 836 while I work. I mean, yeah, it's great for her, but I work for me. And I don't think that should be taboo to say out loud, and I think it is somewhat in our culture. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Amy said about the Chinese. I think this idea of motherhood is an extreme sport, and I think this concurrent helicopter parenting, some people claim it's a financial necessity, that, you know, we're sort of worried about the global economy, that we're afraid of the Chinese. I totally disagree. I think we've set up a false boogeyman here. I think in the 1950s, it was the Soviets. In the 80s and 90s, it was the Japanese. And I think now it's easy to claim it's the Chinese. I think most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, are really afraid of our next door neighbors. I don't think it's a coincidence that in the 1950s, the phrase keeping up with the Joneses was coined. I think, you know, if little Sally Jones next door, or I guess these days Apple Jones, has a special tutor to get into preschool, your kid is damn well going to get one, right? I mean, that's the way it is. We get nervous. And I think there's this big fear, and we've all sort of touched on this. I think there's this really big fear that if someone's doing something differently than us, then one of us must be wrong. But the truth of the matter is, and I think everyone would agree, there's a million right ways to raise a kid. At least I hope there are. And I really believe there are very few wrong ways. I just want to say one quick thing about humility, because I talked all about self-confidence, but I also think with this perfectionist attitude comes this idea that we can control our children, that we could perfect them as beings and manufacture them. And I think we need to accept that we only have so much control over who they're going to be. You know, I joke about saving for my daughter's therapy. But the truth of the matter is I really believe she will be fine. I truly believe this. And if she's not fine, it's not going to be because I didn't get her into the right preschool or because I didn't sign her up for mini Mozart or whatever other piece of crap there is I'm supposed to do. But it's going to be because of the cruel fate of, you know, genetics or fate. You know, it's things that are out of my control. So here's the thing. I truly wish this, that there was some magic cocktail I could take, right, that would give me the self-confidence to stand up here and say, hey, everybody, I'm Julie Buxbaum, and I am a kick-ass mom who is sometimes selfish. And also at the same time, have the humility to say, I also recognize there's only so much I can control for my daughter. But here's the sad part. How do you get me to take that cocktail, right? You play on my deepest, darkest fears. You tell me Apple Jones's mom is taking it, right? You tell me good mommies are, right? And that's how I take it. So I just want to go full circle here and talk a little bit about this idea of having it all. Can you have it all? I don't know. I feel like if we hold on to the saint mommy concept, this desire to be letter perfect, this need to be completely selfless, having it all, I don't know. I think I'd like to have a little bit less. Thank you.